Now, at the time, a member of the committee said that was, quote, absolutely tampering with witnesses. Let's discuss all of this and more with two former federal prosecutors, Glenn Kirschner and Carol Lam. Both are MSNBC legal analysts. Glenn, I'll start with you. How unusual is it that the Secret Service is served with this subpoena?
You know, it may be somewhat unusual that they're being served with a subpoena, but it's not that unusual that there is information that they have that might be relevant to something Congress is doing or something the Department of Justice is doing. And there has been, I'll call it a spotty history of full and robust compliance from the Secret Service. But let me share a quick story, Eamon, and I think it qualifies as irony because when I was a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Attorney's Office, we often came into possession of cell phones as evidence in our criminal cases. And it was not at all unusual for information to have been deleted by the owner of the cell phone before we seized it as evidence. And you know what we did with those cell phones? We didn't go down to Quantico and use the lab down there, although they have great forensic services. We went to the United States Secret Service Forensic Sciences Division to have them retrieve for us what had been deleted off of cell phones. They are extremely adept at that. So and like you, I want to chuckle at this, but of course it's so devastating that there are text messages that would have shed significant light on what was going on January 5th and 6th, particularly down in that basement with Mike Pence, who would not get in the car. He was telling the Secret Service. You can imagine that would have generated some text messages. It is really disturbing that those messages have somehow mysteriously vanished.
So let me just read between the lines of what you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you simply not buying that the data was lost as a result of migration of this information to the phones? Because, again, I'm a layman. I am not the Secret Service. I've never worked in government. When I back up my phone, when I buy a new iPhone, I back it up 2 or 3 times. It is on automatic backup just for that reason. I don't have anything nearly as important as text messages of Secret Service agents. So are you not buying that they just simply lost data in a migration?
Let me put it this way. I'll trust, but I'm going to verify. I would be doing precisely what the J6 committee would be doing, serving subpoenas, putting people under oath, getting them to testify. And now, frankly, I think this ups the ante of putting Secret Service officers under oath and putting Mike Pence under oath if there is an absence of evidence that otherwise could have illuminated what was going on.
Fair enough. Carol, as I mentioned at the top, this isn't the first time the Secret Service has been accused of hindering congressional investigations. In fact, on Friday night, I spoke with the Washington Post's Carol Leonnig, who is one of the foremost experts on the Secret Service. She literally wrote the book on the agency. Take a listen to what she said.
They have been accused in the past of destroying records to obstruct a congressional investigation. That's a long time going back now when in the 1980s, a congressional investigative team was trying to understand how much the Secret Service had been warned ahead of time about assassination attempts, including the attempt that took the life of John F. Kennedy. Critical documents were essentially destroyed weeks or days after investigators sought them.
And again here, a similar MO maybe. The messages that the committee is seeking were reportedly deleted after the Homeland Security Inspector General requested them. Any cause of concern here from your perspective? What does this tell you?
A lot of cause for concern. What we don't know is whether this was incompetence or lack of cooperation or obstructionism or a little bit of all three or maybe none. One of the problems with this new world of communications is that everyone has a different way of keeping their communications. And if you look at AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon, you would see that each keeps text messages for a different length of time and for not very long. But I agree with what Glenn says, and there's definitely a problem here. that anyone who thinks effectively erased something is probably wrong. There are a lot of ways that these types of communications end up actually being kept, even though the user doesn't think they're being kept. What is distressing to me is that the Home Security OIG, Office of the Inspector General, seems to see a pattern of non-cooperation by the Secret Service. And that's disturbing to me, because they've actually gone so far as to write a letter to the committee saying they're not getting cooperation, and that's a problem. So that's what I would keep an eye on.
Glenn, let me ask you about this allegation of witness tampering. If the DOJ were to take up a case like this, what would be the threshold? What would be required for them to prove actual witness tampering?
Yeah, let me first say that a call that failed to connect does not constitute witness tampering, but boy, is it an important piece of evidence that needs to be investigated. And here is the significant downside of the Department of Justice not being deeply involved in a criminal investigation right now of Donald Trump. I'm going to assume for the moment that they're not deeply involved, because if they were, you know what they would be doing? Something I did dozens of times when I had a witness who was tampered with. We would bring the witness in immediately for a recorded callback. We would sit there. We would monitor the callback. We would script it, although our script for the witness is typically you just listen and let the target say whatever they want to say, but we might suggest some follow-up questions in real time. And then you would have a recording that could be used to prove witness tampering in court. When we get that recording, we immediately put it in an affidavit in support of an arrest warrant, and we arrest the person immediately who is tampering with witnesses. We do it to incapacitate the witness, and we do it to deter others from tampering with witnesses. And it's not only an important standalone crime subject to up to 20 years in prison, it's devastating consciousness of guilt evidence. All of that should have been done at light speed once there was some suggestion that Donald Trump was calling some White House staffer, probably not for restaurant recommendations, right? So this highlights the serious downside of DOJ not being deeply involved in a criminal investigation of Donald Trump.
Carol, why do you think we haven't seen more action from the Justice Department? I mean, as it seems, this alleged tampering has happened more than once with what has been implied. And it's hard to really get a sense whether the DOJ is investigating it, but it doesn't seem we're seeing the kind of forward presence of an investigation, if you will.
A couple of thoughts on that, Eamon. You're right. We may not know, because unlike the January 6th committee, the Department of Justice doesn't give on their investigations. That's just not what they're supposed to do, and it's appropriate that they not do that. I will say that the amount of work that is involved, I actually worry for the DOJ, because not only do they have all of these prosecutions from the events on January 6th, the rioters that they have to prosecute, but they also have not only these things that the January 6th committee has brought to light for the first time that we're seeing. DOJ has to investigate that. But on top of that, have these sideshows of people not complying with subpoenas, of people not cooperating with investigations, and each of those intensive, I actually become concerned about DOJ resources available to run down all of those different avenues. The January 6th committee can put on these, or they can interview them, and they can take snippets of their depositions and play them, and there's no cross-examination. It's not a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. It's a much higher bar for the Department of Justice, and they have a lot of work on their hands, and they have a much higher burden of proof. So that's why I think you're not hearing a lot, because they have a lot more work and testing that they have to do of all of these theories that are now coming to the fore.
All right, Glenn Kirschner, Carol Lamb, thanks to the both of you for starting us off this hour. Greatly appreciated your insights.